I'm here to talk about a couple of things today. Digital transformation, which I know is kind of a buzzword that doesn't mean a lot to many people, but I think there is something behind that in terms of what people are trying to do in terms of using technology to drive the business forward. So we're going to talk about that. And then the second part of the discussion is going to be more around architecture, patterns, and considerations for building new cloud-native capabilities while also leveraging your existing assets. Okay, so that's kind of what we got in store for today. The first thing I want to talk about is, when I talk to organizations, I see a lot of people really, under the gun in terms of pressure. They're being pressured by the executive team, they're being pressured by the board to leverage technology in new and exciting ways to drive the business forward. And so whether it's digital transformation or digital innovation or digital business, it's all around being able to drive more agility and efficiency through the organization. I also see that there's a lot of competition that's going on, right? So there are new market entrants that maybe you didn't even anticipate, or maybe you're a new market entrant that's going to disrupt somebody else. But it's important to know that that can lead to customer churn, it can lead to other things, and in many cases, some of those new market entrants are more agile than the traditional companies. I also think it's important when you put a plan together that this should be driven based on business value, right? You're not doing digital for digital's sake, you're doing digital because you want to drive improvements to the business. So think top line, how can you drive more revenue? How can you use digital potentially to allow you to enter new markets or to use digital to augment your existing physical goods and services, okay? And then on the other side of that is to use it to drive operational efficiency or to reduce cost. And then finally, I think it's really important to put together a set of KPIs that are, appropriate for your organization. And whether you're measuring things from a customer perspective or an employee's perspective, I think it's important. There's a lot of different metrics you can use, Net Promoter Score, but I think it's really important to engage and determine, what your digital efforts are doing. Is it moving the needle, or do you need to course correct? The other thing that I see over and over again is it's not always apparent where to start. I think it's really easy to have a technology conversation. I think it's a lot more difficult to figure out exactly how to apply technology to a business problem. And unfortunately, I think sometimes IT is too quick to jump to technology, and they don't explain or articulate the business value in a way that makes sense to the business owner, right? And then on the business side, I think sometimes they're reticent to change. They're a little bit worried about using digital to disrupt what they're doing. So those are some of the things that can kind of stop you dead in your tracks. I think it's also important that you have a plan. And I don't mean you spend a year putting together a plan, but you start with corporate goals and you let those corporate goals drive what you want to do in terms of innovation, in terms of technology, and how can you apply technology to different aspects of the business? How can you use technology to improve the employee engagement as well as the customer experience, as well as partner optimization? So I think there's a lot that can happen there. I think if you don't put together a plan, then that leads to indecision, malaise, conflict, and all those things that we want to avoid as an organization. The other thing is, I don't think that the analysts have potentially really done us that many favors because things are changing so fast. So if you're familiar with some of these categories that Gartner and Forrester talk about, you can see that we've moved from, MAD-P, which is around mobility. We've moved from APaaS, which is around app dev. And then the final reference here is backend as a service, mobile backend as a service. So, everything's pretty fluid, right? So if you make a decision based on an industry category, I think you're going to probably put yourself, in a bad spot. You want to make a decision based on your requirements, okay? And then on the other side, we also see people that are driving things more from a content-led perspective. So you're thinking primarily website, you're thinking conversion in terms of customers or portals or so forth. And we're also seeing a transition there too from just kind of CMS or WCM, so content management system or web content management, and to be able to uplift that into something that's more focused on customer engagement. So, I think these are good capabilities to look at. I think you just have to make sure that you don't always just think of one or the other. I think it's more important to kind of think of a holistic approach. So you see a lot of buzzwords here in terms of this word cloud, And some of those are, trending, but I think there's a lot of meat in terms of some of what those words are doing. And I think it's important, that you don't just think about app dev, you don't just think about content management, you think about them potentially, how they can work together, because there's no reason that content that is surfaced in a website is not relevant to some other application experience like mobile or web or even a chatbot. So the next thing I want to talk about is this concept of digital transformation and disruption. There are some companies up here, I think most of them are going to be familiar to you. WeWorks, I know, has a local presence here, Amazon. But the purpose of this slide is to really talk about how, if you think about Amazon, now they're in the food delivery business, right? And for a traditional food supplier to restaurants and hotels, that's really disrupted their business, right? Because they're not organized or designed to be able to deliver something in 2 hours, right? So here comes Amazon out of left field and is a potential disruptor to a more traditional food supplier. WeWork is the same way in terms of a traditional real estate vendors or firms. They're being caught by WeWork because WeWork has really rethought digital and how it can be applied to the working environments. In the United States, there's a big push in terms of healthcare because we have private healthcare, and so we're really being incented to move to a more affordable model. And so we want to be able to optimize the patient experience. So why does the patient experience have to be any worse than the retail experience? So I think that really applies to everybody, where I just don't think, that organizations are thinking that way. So that's another disruptor. And one of our customers, Canopy Health, has been doing that. And then you have organizations like Apple that have a complete ecosystem, right? And then you've got vendors that are headphone suppliers that are competing against that complete ecosystem, and it puts them, in a tough spot. So those are just some examples. And so, our belief, this is not true for every industry and every organization, but you can be, either disrupted or you can choose to be a disruptor. And obviously, we're a big proponent of being able to use technology to disrupt people. I know that this was a previous slide, but that was done in a different language, so I'm going to touch on this a little bit again, but on the English side. And what we see is to do that disruption in a good way is a heavy lift, right? Because we're not talking about simple applications. We're not talking about, isolated applications that are not integrated into the entire infrastructure. We're not talking about applications that are designed for a single device. And this is not just for consumer, because if you think about your employees, every employee is a consumer, and they bring that same expectation into the workplace. And employees are no longer, held captive by IT because they can bypass IT, which leads into a lot of other problems. But there's a lot of different things that kind of make up what is necessary. And these are kind of principles that we've designed into our platform and tools to enable experiences that meet each one of those requirements. The other thing that we think is very important is this notion of, it takes more than developers to develop an application, right? I know that Dan earlier this morning talked about, this concept of front-end and back-end developers, and now there's a concept of full-stack developers, and there's, a lot of different ways that you can divide those things. But even so, it's not just developers. You need DevOps, right? Everybody knows the critical role that DevOps plays in terms of being able to manage the infrastructure. And then there's a couple of newer, job titles that are up there. Data scientist, obviously that's been a hot topic now in terms of AI and machine learning and applying analytics to applications, but not only to analyze things, but to insert or to implement or to integrate that a predictive result directly into the application. So think about field service scenario where you're able to determine that a machine in some remote location needs to be fixed, and you're able to integrate that into a mobile application that drives the person to actually, who's responsible for doing that, that's integrated with chat so that that person can talk to a chatbot to determine what it is that they need to do, that's integrated into AR, so when they're going there to make those changes, all that can be integrated and driven based on a prediction. Okay, so that's the power of what you can do with some of these different capabilities. And then the last D is designer. And so if you think about, if we're going to build compelling applications, can we leave it to a programmer to design Probably not, right? Because I'm not saying that every programmer is not capable of design, but if you're going to create something that spans multiple device types, typically you're going to want to be able to use a designer to do that. And so I'm going to touch a little bit on this as we move forward, because I think that there's kind of a gulf between the designer and the developer, just as there was a gulf between app dev and IT ops. So it's important, and our platforms and solutions are really driven and support each one of those roles, and it's all about being able to make each one of them highly productive. And so our mission is pretty simple. We just help organizations, build and deliver the best user experience, whether that's a website, mobile application, a PWA, it doesn't really matter. It depends on what the needs of the business are. So just a couple of possibilities. I know we've went through some use cases. This one shows a chat bot, and you're probably thinking, why am I showing you a different language? The point here is that you want to be able to think about language support as well. So that's an important characteristic of what you want to be able to do. This is an example of a hospital that's using a chat bot to allow patients to schedule appointments, right? So they've been able to decrease the burden on their call center and to be a lot more engaging in terms of being able to work with their patients. The next one, and this is an example of kind of combining, the power of content management as well as being able to build applications. Sorry, it doesn't show up very well, but really what you're seeing here is a mobile application where somebody is using chat to integrate and to let their insurance company know that they've been in an accident, right? And as part of that accident, they can take a picture of the accident, they can get a real-time quote in terms of what the cost is going to be, and that can all be integrated as part of a chatbot feature as well as tied into content. And then finally, I made the reference that there's no reason that you can't integrate video within a mobile application. Well, that video file might be something that's managed by your content management system. So just a couple of things that you can think about in terms of being able to do. And I talked quite a bit about customer experience, but it's not just about customer experience. There's research that Forrester has done that indicates that most organizations don't understand the vital link between employee engagement and customer experience, okay? To the point that organizations that have happier employees that are many times engaged more effectively with digital, that they are more profitable, and that they have higher customer satisfaction scores, okay? And I think it's just back to that consumer-grade experience that we have as employees now, that we want to, have delightful applications that we use to drive our business in terms of what we do. So the other thing that we see too is that we want to avoid, this unnecessary cost of education. So if you roll out a new application, you talk about change management, you want to be able to minimize that and make it very easy for employees to consume new application capabilities, which brings us into this concept of micro apps, which I know there was a session this morning. And so this gets back to an employee who may have 5 or 6 mobile devices, 5 or 6 mobile applications. Maybe they go to one application to submit their expense report. They go to another application to do something HR related. They go to another application because they have to, to identify some type of workflow feature for what they're doing. And so the problem with that is, many times they go to each application, and each time they go to that application, they have to relearn it because maybe they don't go to it on a daily basis. So just as we've been able to create a portal that's a web experience to allow employees and partners to see things, in one fell swoop, why don't we design a next generation portal that is ideal for mobile? And so that's really the idea that, that you allow our platform to take care of the things on the left in terms of authentication, push notification, being able to manage things within, the store, and then your focus is just on the UI and the business logic, right? Which is why, as Dan talked about, that you can crank these things out very quickly, and then we're doing the integration on the back end. And so you can extend an employee portal on the left with an application, and you can see the power of this where you're able to log in through facial recognition. You're able to see different things that you want to do. You get pushed a capability. In this case, it's from Workday because this person needs to do something there, and it's all within that nice application container structure. Same thing goes with employee partners. So if you have extranets, that you'd want to be able to expose this information, there's no reason that you couldn't extend the extranet to have a micro app that drives, more engagement with your partners, okay? So the next thing, and we touched on this in terms of design ops, and I think this is the designer role that we talked about. And what we see in this organization, in most organizations is, we're talking about plan and develop. We're not talking about test, deploy, and maintain. We're talking about that plan and design. And this is kind of a representation of the problem. Hopefully you don't know what that is because it's a Big Mac, and my hope is that you're not eating them because they're not that healthy, but that's an aside. But, and a designer, in their mind, they've designed this on the left, right? But then what gets produced is the thing on the right, right? So it obviously, it doesn't meet the needs of the designer. That creates tension between the designer. I mean, the developer's not trying not to help the designer, but sometimes the designer's designing things that are too difficult, okay? Or the developer, has some suggestions that he or she thinks would make the design more effective, okay? So there's just a lot of back and forth between design and developer, just as there was a lot of back and forth and miscommunication and a lack of communication between dev and IT ops, or DevOps. So don't worry, I know there's a lot of detail here. Conceptually, what I want you to know is that the designers are not working with an IDE, right? You've got developers that have their set of tools, and the designer set of tools are a very different set of tools. They're using things like Adobe, they're using things like UXPen, they're putting their design into those tools, and then what they do is they give an artifact to the developer and say, this is what I want you to create, okay? Sometimes it's easy for them to create it, sometimes it's not so easy, sometimes it's impossible, or it would just be so difficult that the time commitment would be, out of control. And so what we have taken to market is a capability called Unite UX that basically takes the work that is done in the design tools on the left and creates a meta bridge that creates metadata that actually creates application code, okay? And we support being able to go from these tools to like JavaScript and Angular. We're going to continue to support additional capabilities as well, so you're tied into one development thing. But what's really important here is that there's round-trip support, right? So the changes that are, well, the design that is given and then generated into code, if the developer makes changes, and that code, the metadata gets pushed back so that the designer sees what has been changed, and then they can collaborate about, well, I made this change for this reason, I made this change, and then they can work through things. So really, we feel really an exciting part of what we're going to be doing in terms of going forward with our product strategy to incorporate the designer more effectively into the overall workflow process. Okay, so that's kind of my introduction in terms of digital transformation, digital innovation. I would just summarize it by saying that, it's not always apparent where to start, but the first thing to do is you need to plan where to start. We actually have some capabilities that can help you with that in terms of services, and we have a complete methodology that takes you through what are your business goals, and based on those business goals, we start aligning digital initiatives to those goals. And we think about what we need to do from an employee perspective, customer perspective, partner point of view, and then also operational efficiency as well. So those are some of the things that you can kind of think through to think about, okay, well, if I apply mobile to this use case, I can support a company objective and drive things forward, okay? Thank you.